The views and opinions of guests on this show are not a reflection of the views of the management or staff of this channel. The production of this show is made possible by the support of viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and become a subscriber. Welcome to Conversations That Matter. Each week we address an issue that is shaping the future of British Columbia. Today joining me is Mike Manier. Mike, democracy. Where are we at in this country when it comes to engagement in the democratic process?
Well, Stu, let's start with the last federal election, 2011. Barely half of those eligible to vote in Canada exercised their franchise, 54%. That's the second lowest turnout level in Canadian election history. Where do you think we rate in terms of other developed countries?
Bottom half.
A C. We get a C when it comes to voter turnout. We're doing a little bit better than the United States. They're at about 38% voter turnout in federal elections. So we shouldn't be patting ourselves on the back. It's a big issue, and Mario Canseco is going to be speaking with us today. He's been a pollster for over 10 years, worked for Angus Reid, and now with Insights West. It's interesting when you look at elections, oftentimes people say, it's the young people, they're just not turning out. And in fact, they're right. The 18 to 24-year-olds in the 2011 federal election here, not even 40% of them bothered to vote. But Mario says, let's take a different perspective. It's not just the youth, it's more complicated than that. The future elections, provincial, federal elections that we're looking at in the years to come, they're going to be decided by what he calls non-voters. So these are the people that just don't turn out. But they do turn out when there's a galvanizing issue, something like a scandal. Think back to the 2006 federal election and the sponsorship scandal. So Mario Canseco has a lot to say, obviously, about the sad state of affairs of our current election situation, but has some great ideas as well about how can governments work in the future to make sure that more Canadians have a say in the future.
So many of those big issues over the last 10 years are about scandal or getting rid of somebody rather than embracing a bold new idea. Are we out of new ideas? Is that part of the equation, or is it voter education? Is it voter apathy? You know, it's a very difficult, very complex issue to try and address, understand, and then turn the trend around.
No doubt. And Stu, a lot of people will say we're missing an opportunity in terms of not capitalizing on the internet and how the internet can help get more people to vote. When people were asked, those that didn't vote, why didn't you vote? Well over 55% of them said, well, I was busy. I had to get the kids to school, I had a work commitment, and we were on holidays. The same people said if they had the opportunity to vote online, over half those people that didn't vote said, absolutely, I'll vote online. So are we missing an opportunity? Is it maybe not so much about the issues and the scandals, but maybe we're not leveraging all the tools and technology that we have at our disposal to really open up the electoral process?
Mario gets into that and so many other aspects of what's happening with democracy here in British Columbia in the conversation that I recorded with him on August the 25th. We'll be back in a moment with that conversation. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I'm glad that you're here because I find it perplexing. We live in one of the most liberal democracies in the world, and yet the people who call this country home, and in particular our province here, British Columbia, in increasing numbers aren't bothering to take up their democratic right, and that is to go vote, and also to get involved in politics, especially at the local level. What's going on?
Well, what I've seen in the research that I've conducted on this matter is there's more attention paid to the federal level of politics. To a lesser extent to what happens in BC, but municipal politics, which really affect us the most of our taxes go there. people do not pay attention to them as much as they would. They can be really happy about something that Harper said, or very unhappy with him because of some decision that he made, but they aren't really that close to their municipal politicians, and that's been one of the major difficulties as well. They're not paying attention to it.
Is that because when we look at what's happening on the federal level, there's more money that gets thrown at it, the media covers it more in depth, there's a lot more ads, there's this sense of it's more important?
Well, BC has a difficulty which we do not have in Toronto. The city has effectively amalgamated. So you can have a very big story about Toronto that is going to be seen by a lot of people who maybe 30, 40 years ago were living in a very different area that was not actually Toronto. And here you may have a story that is Vancouver based, and you go, well, there might be a lot of people outside of the city who may not understand this, who don't care about bike lanes, who don't know who the mayor is. Maybe we shouldn't devote 5 or 6 minutes to this story because it's not BC wide.
So does it come down to geography that way? Or does it come down to the ability of journalistic outlets to be able to cover that? Or does it just come down to information overload on behalf of the average person who's going, well, I got to pick up my kids from daycare, and I got to pay the bills?
Well, there's a couple of issues there, and one of them, which is really key for me, is the fact that with the voter turnout becoming lower and lower, it's ultimately about having something that a lot of people can get behind. And we haven't seen that recently. Surrey had a very dismal turnout the last time around. And one of the reasons for it was that everybody thought that Diane Watts was going to win in a landslide. A lot of people maybe had something different they wanted to do on a rainy Saturday morning. Why go vote? Maybe I'm happy and I know that this isn't going to change. But Vancouver, which had a much more competitive race, also had a very low voter turnout. Essentially we had 2 out of 5 people who were registered to vote in the city who came out and voted, which is very low.
2 out of 5.
Slightly less than that. I think it was 37.5%. So even less than that, which is dismal. If you look at the federal elections, the one election over the past 100 years where we had the best voter turnout was 1988. And it was an election that had the big idea behind it. It was essentially a choice between free trade with the United States or not. It wasn't necessarily progressive conservative versus NDP versus liberal. It was free trade or no free trade. Mm-hmm. When you have an issue like that, people show up and actually vote. If you don't have an issue that is going to make somebody who may not actually pay a lot of attention to what is going on around them, then they're not going to show up and vote.
Well, that 1988 election actually became a referendum. It wasn't just you're the prime minister, but this is a referendum on free trade.
And it would have been interesting if the referendum on transportation had happened at the same time as the municipal election this year, because maybe that would have boosted turnout. We're still, it's really early to know what is going to happen now, but I guess there's only one way to go, and that is up, hopefully.
But at the same time as we see voter turnout dropping, we also see civic engagement at all levels. There's development going on in my neighborhood. There's a new transportation line that's going through. And people go, oh, when did this happen? How come I wasn't told? And yet there are avenues to get the information out. It's not being heard. People aren't getting involved.
Well, I think there's several difficulties for that. One of them is the fact that we're busy, we're doing a lot of stuff. We may see something when we come back home that asks us to go to a meeting and to spend 2 hours there on a Saturday night or on a Wednesday evening. It might be too difficult for the average person to be there. Maybe you have something to say. There might be some electronic forums as well, but looking at the numbers that the city gets on this, it's not something that they have done very well. They are really doing well on some other areas, such as sanitation, but they're not really doing well in one thing that they wanted to do when they got elected, which was essentially connecting with voters. And even those who don't like you, we want to know what you think about what is going on in your city. And there's a lot of people out there who aren't happy with the job they're doing.
There is this perception, though, and you can talk to people in almost any sector of society that say, what's the point? City Hall's not going to listen to me. They've already made up their mind. What I have to say doesn't matter. Are they right in that perception?
Well, it's ultimately about things that you saw happening. And I think one of the best examples is the first bike lane. Before it was voted on council, they already had the equipment ready to build it. It was sitting there just waiting for the green light from council. And we could argue that they had a majority in the council and that it was something that was going to be rubber stamped. But it sends the wrong message when you haven't even voted on it and you're already ready to build it. So ultimately, I think it really has to do with how you talk to people who may not be happy. It's very easy to find a forum in this city if you like the bike lanes, if you ride a bike, if you're happy with the way things are going, if you're all about certain issues that might be something that is likable for the Vision Vancouver voter. If you're not one of them, it might be tough for you to have your say.
Well, for many it seems almost impossible. So we wind up with camps of people who are the, for lack of a better term, the rent-a-crowd. They show up and protest almost anything. And I don't know that they're getting listened to by anyone. And yet they're an extension of what was a political movement in the 1960s that really did have impact. And so if that, like, I'm going to take to the streets and let the elected officials know I'm not happy about this, but that doesn't seem to be working, what other venues do we have available to us?
Well, one of the reasons why it doesn't work as well as it did in the past is that you may not be representing everybody. This is what makes my job so wonderful and so compelling. I get the chance to ask a representative sample how they feel about things. And I get all those emails from those on both sides of the issue. Everybody in my family is happy with the mayor. Congratulations, you live in a family where you can all get together and not fight over politics. It certainly wasn't the case in my family. Or the other side, how can you say that Harper is really popular when we see that there's a lot of people, there's nobody I know who likes him? Well, this is the way Canada works. This is the way that the city works. Mm-hmm. There may be a lot of people who do not think the way you do, and if you're getting together in the same place, that doesn't make you representatives of the entire city or the entire country.
So how do we get beyond that? How do we get a better collective voice without having to say, okay, well, I'm now going to dedicate myself to working within that political party? I still want my views to be represented and considered when making a decision that hopefully will take into the best interests of all of us.
Well, voting certainly is the first step, and that is the one step that we're forgetting many times. People may not be happy with the candidates that they have. There's a lot of disappointment with the system, particularly people who vote for a party that is not electing anybody. Green Party, for instance, they only have one MLA in Victoria, one MP in Ottawa, and that's it. And there's a lot of people who say, I live in an area and I want to vote Green, but if I vote Green, then I'm not going to win the election. Well, it's not always about winning. It's about registering what you think should be happening, and you have your own representative to do so. But one of the difficulties there is people, especially young people, tend to become involved in the whole political aspect of life when they're 19 or 20, 21 maybe, and they're starting to pay attention. They will vote for the first time from 18 to 22, and they become disenchanted with the idea that they've lost. But I was told that this was about democracy. I voted, and the candidate I voted and the party I voted for did not form the government. Well, that's the way the game is played. It's not always going to go your way. And there's a lot of people who expect that if they're going to vote for somebody, they have to win.
So do we have to take a step back right into the school system and say there has to be a better teaching of how the system works, and recognize that you have the opportunity to put your voice forward, but it doesn't mean that it's going to carry the majority?
Well, I would argue that it should also start in the home. There's a lot of people who I've met over the course of my time in Canada who aren't really that interested in the whole political aspect, and it's something that wasn't really nurtured by their parents. There's a lot of pride on certain aspects of the country, for instance, the healthcare system, the fact that we're great at hockey. To a lesser extent, there's a lot of good feelings to the monarchy in some areas. But when you ask them how the country works, it's difficult. I took the citizenship test, and I did well. I'm a citizen now, and I'm very happy about it. But I was showing the citizenship test to a lot of people in my office back in 2007, and they weren't able to answer the first 7 questions, which is terrifying. They were born in this country,
here.
And they don't know how it operates. They couldn't figure out who the head of state was. They couldn't figure out how the prime minister got elected. And you start to wonder, you're not talking about this at home, so when the election rolls around, you're going to have other things to do instead of voting.
There's a considerable amount of evidence, I understand, that suggests that if you don't live in a family that engages in the political discussion and strives to understand how it works, the likelihood of you voting starts to diminish rapidly. Then add in level of education, and it drops off even more. So is this how we wind up having a group of elites who, in essence, pick who's going to run the country?
Well, there's an example on how you can counter that, and it's my favorite example from a 2008 election in the United States. The state of Indiana. It had not been carried by a Democratic candidate since Lyndon Johnson in 1964. And Obama's campaign knocked on every door. They went to the universities. They went to Notre Dame. They went to Indiana University and talked to the young people. You may not have voted in your life, but this one is important. Here's a candidate who's different. Here's a candidate who's going to give you the healthcare system that you want. They ended up winning Indiana the first time, 2008. They didn't win 4 years later. But that election was astonishing for everybody who likes politics. Here's an area that hasn't voted Democratic in decades. And they won on the basis of young people who came out and decided to support Obama.
But the way you explain that, it seems that it was the team that was behind Obama helped to make that happen.
But it's also because you have this big idea behind you. You can knock on as many doors as you want, but if there's nothing that is going to be compelling enough for me to go there and vote for you, it's not going to be enough.
So does that say something about where we're at as a society? Do we think, well, there aren't any big ideas left any longer? That things are working quite well. Most people are employed. There's pretty good education. Healthcare kind of works. So the system works. What do I have to worry about?
Well, it is one of the situations that has led to so few changes in government over the past few years. You know, Quebec has a mind of its own, and they like to go back and forth between separatists and liberals. But there are other areas where it's been very difficult for any political party to break through. Ontario was a great example, for instance. They started out in a situation where they thought they didn't want to stay with the Liberals. They didn't like what they saw during that campaign, and they ended up staying with them, giving them a majority mandate. So, you know, one of the difficulties is that you can ask people on how they will vote if they're happy with the way things are going. They want the change, but if it doesn't materialize with everybody else, then it's not going to work.
So does voter turnout go up when there's dissatisfaction with the sitting government and down when there is complacency?
Yes, long lineups usually mean that the government is in trouble, or the incumbent MLA in the area, for instance. That suggests that there's people out there who may not be happy with the way things are going. Surrey is a great example 3 years ago. Less than 30% of voters actually bothered to cast a ballot. It was a massive victory for Diane Watts, but when you factor in the actual percentage of registered voters who supported her, it's a minority. It looks fantastic when you say, I got 80% of the vote. Yes, but you only had 20-something percent of the voters who actually bothered to show up at the polling station.
So have we also reached a point where politics have become very entrenched? This is a blue state, that's a red state, Diane Watts is going to win here, Christy Clark is going to win there, Stephen Harper here, Adrian Dix there. And so if you're in those jurisdictions, you say, what does my vote matter anyways?
Well, it makes it a lot tougher, of course. Vancouver Island is a good example. I mean, there's one green, and all of the rest of it is NDP. So it's a difficult area. That's where the capital is. And the Liberals do not have any seats there, which is kind of bizarre. But ultimately, it's about using those resources where you need to. Again, going back to the 2008 election, they thought Indiana was winnable. Wyoming, not so much. Let's not knock on a lot of doors on a place where we're not going to get those votes that we need.
And so political parties are now starting to be very strategic in the way that they position their dollars and their efforts to say, this is where we can win, we're not even going to bother over here. How then do they wind up with a mandate that says, because at the end of it all, it's the winner takes all, yes, and you're the winner of everybody. How does the group that doesn't win get representation then, especially if there is low voter turnout in those areas, because people say, what difference does it make?
Well, and it certainly raises questions about your ability as an opposition to get people to topple the government, so to speak. And there are certain examples where it has worked very well. The election of 2001, for instance, the first election for the BC Liberals, that was a massive mandate, and it wasn't something that was based necessarily on the NDP voters staying home. It was based more than anything on people being mad at what was happening at the time.
And they were throwing out the sitting government.
Exactly. It wasn't a question of, and I would argue that the 2006 election was similar to that. That there was never this embrace of Harper or of the federal conservatives or the values that they represented. It was more a question of we're really unhappy with the way the liberals have been running the show. We're not happy with the sponsorship scandal. They hammered that a point across until people decided to vote conservative.
Mob mentality becomes a part of the equation as well, doesn't it? How do we get around that? Like, there's so many challenges around increasing voter turnout, and mob mentality being one of them. You're the group that seems to be in control, and well, I'm not going to stick my head above the ground for fear you're going to cut it off.
Well, and it's something that can happen in many instances. You know, we just came off an election where it was very difficult to figure out who was going to win because of a lot of people changing their minds and a lot of people who weren't actually saying what they were planning on doing. And this is something that can happen in many other places. One of the difficulties there is you may not want to say something because it's an unpopular opinion.
But still, here I am. This is my community. This is the place that matters to me the most because that's where my house is. I own that piece of land. I have title. I pay taxes on it. It means a lot to me. And still, I'm not going down and holding the government that is the most responsive, or supposed to be the most responsive to me, accountable. And so then they can go ahead and do almost whatever they want. Until maybe they push it too far, but that may be 15 years down the road.
Well, what is important there is it's very difficult for a government to be thrown out of office or for a lot of people to vote necessarily against them unless something goes horribly wrong. My example would be Sam Sullivan. He was very popular, very well liked, somebody who was a great example. He went to Turin to get the flag. He was an international figure. Mm-hmm. The garbage strike ultimately destroyed his municipal career. People were so unhappy with the fact that they did not get any garbage picked up for weeks. And that leads to his own party saying, we don't want you to run in the next election.
It's a very complex set of ingredients that go into determine what voter engagement will be and what voter turnout will be. There's no easy answer, is there?
No. And I think it really depends on three factors. One of them is the value of your idea, something that is going to make it compelling for me to care. Maybe I don't care because I'm happy with the way things are going. You need to tell me why I should care, and that's you know, reason number one. Reason number
and that
two,
becomes the candidate's responsibility.
Right, it's something that they have to do themselves. Reason number two, the voter needs to get informed. It's not just about somebody who knocked on your door. You need to go to their website. You need to read about what they're doing. You need to learn about what their parties had done in the past. And
take responsibility.
Absolutely, it's your responsibility. Mm-hmm. And the third one is, and it really continues to be organizing. You know, I live in what used to be a Christy Clark's riding. Every day we got a phone call from different people, from different political parties, pollsters. Everybody wanted to know how we were feeling about things. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that it was happening at that particular time because of the importance of the race. Right. I don't know if they're going to be calling that often in the next 100 days before the Vancouver municipal election.
Well, when was the last time they called?
Municipally?
Yeah.
Never.
And that's part of the problem. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
We'll be watching. Yeah. Thank you.